What's going on, vinyl community? Welcome to another video with the Record Spinner, and welcome to the first episode of a series called A Guide to KISS Bootlegs, delving into the unofficial realm of KISS recordings. Since this is the first episode, the era of the first album seems like a fitting place to start, hence why this episode will be focusing on the 1974 radio broadcasts. Long before the internet and live streaming, radio was the most accessible platform for many listeners, and it was almost the norm for there to be concerts broadcasted to reach larger audiences or those not lucky to attend the show. What was widely considered to be the norm for most artists, regardless of popularity at the time, is astounding to think about in retrospect, especially with a band like KISS, who had just released their first album, went on their first tour of America, and were pounding the pavement in terms of developing their undisputable reputation as a fantastic live band, for there to be 4 shows that were recorded for radio stations across America. This video will go into the backstory behind those shows, how they circulated in terms of which bootlegs they appeared on, and I'll show what I have in my personal collection of those shows. There's quite a bit to get through, so enough of the chit chat. Let's jump into what this video is all about. The first show we're going to focus on is the one from the Agora Ballroom in Cleveland, Ohio on April 1st, 1974. It goes without saying that the Agora is a legendary beast in its own right, one of those classic rock venues that almost every act that you can think of performed there. They were really on the cutting edge of the live entertainment industry, employing many people that would go on to be giants within their respective realms and pioneering many production techniques. One of the innovations they introduced was broadcasting live acts on local radio stations, and by 1973, WMMS was hosting a weekly radio special called WMMS Live from the Agora, where shows that were recorded on Monday nights would be broadcasted on Wednesdays. And it sort of worked out because the station would promote the venue, and in turn the DJs would serve as MCs for the shows. Sure enough, KISS found themselves on a Monday night bill that fell on April Fool's Day in 1974, opening for Rory Gallagher. A little interesting factoid about this show to make mention of is that during the climax of Black Diamond, as Peter's drum riser was elevating, it got stuck up at the ceiling, and with all the fumes of the pyro, Peter actually passed out and had to be sent to hospital, sparing 1 of his 9 lives. Gene also made mention that the crowd didn't take too kindly to the group as they walked on and the MC introduced them, and by the end of their set, the audience was demanding encores. Now, as for the set list, it seems like they kind of had the core selection of the songs from the debut, and they were kind of shuffled around depending on the show and the tour. But for this show, they included a pre-Dressed to Kill rendering of She, the main difference being that Ace would provide some lead licks in between the stanzas of the second verse. Now, what's interesting is that Rory Gallagher's set was supposedly broadcasted, yet KISS's wasn't. And what consists of the bootleg recording of KISS's set is a pre-FM recording, meaning that it was sourced from tapes that belonged to WMMS versus being sourced from someone who taped the broadcast off the radio. And honestly, this is one of the best sounding recordings of the 1974 broadcasts. These reels were indeed edited, taking out most of the in-between stage raps and tuning, but what remains on the recording is so odd, where Gene asks how many people are in the audience, and he guesses 100. Now let's talk about vinyl pressings of this show. This was first released as These Are the Demons of Rock in 2014, which is part of what I like to call the 1974 live series that, crazy enough, continues to this day. Then it was released as Cleveland 1974 in 2015 with bonus rehearsals from their 10 East 23rd Street loft. 2020 saw the most action in terms of this show being released, since it was also part of the 1974 tour picture disc box set. Then it came out as April Fool, with 4 different colors for each band member and a picture disc featuring the whole band. And then Trademark of Quality released it as One Night Stand. The most recent release came in 2024 as part of the On Tour series, and that's what's in my collection. The next show we're going to be focusing on occurred just under a week later at the Michigan Palace in Detroit, Michigan on April 7th, 1974. This show was billed by radio station WABX as the 6th annual Kite-In, the main event taking place at the Belle Isle Casino and the concert being held later in the evening. Now, due to weather, the event was postponed to April 21st, resulting in $2,000 worth of damages by those who did turn up, and because of that, WABX being forbidden to sponsor any Kite-Ins in the future, although the show raised $7,000 for the cleanup of Belle Isle, so the cause is ironic given the outcome. Now, KISS was the bottom of the bill with Aerosmith being the headliner. And let's just say from previous shows on this tour, there was a bit of friction between the KISS and Aerosmith road crews. WABX tried to provide a remedy by holding a pre-production meeting involving crew and road managers for each band, and the result was Aerosmith's crew granting KISS partial use of the lighting rig, which ultimately affected the impact of KISS's set. Now, what's sort of ironic is that Casablanca covered WABX's expenses for putting on the gig, and in turn, the station pushed KISS heavily. And given KISS's reputation of being a live act that was tough to follow, some of the prolonged changeovers in between bands caused some of the audience to leave, and Aerosmith didn't end up taking the stage until 2 a.m. So you can hypothesize how many of the 5,000 in attendance stuck around that long. Now, as for the set list, it's pretty much the same songs performed from the April 1st gig, but just resequenced in some areas, yet it still starts off with the same classic 1-2 punch of Deuce and Strutter. And as an added bonus, they finished the show with Baby Let Me Go, which became rechristened as Let Me Go Rock and Roll from the Hotter Than Hell album. Even though KISS's set was broadcasted, the pre-FM reels still exist. The only very minor gripe is that the tail end of Baby Let Me Go is cut short, but the stunning quality of the show makes up for it, and I think it's a smidge better than the Cleveland broadcast from the first. Now let's talk about vinyl pressings of this show. Back in 2010, there were 3 different releases put out by Trademark of Quality called It's Only Rock and Roll But I Like It, High Voltage, and Earthshaker. Each of these were limited to 105 copies, came pressed on different marbled colored vinyl, and with different colored inserts. Then in 2016, it was released as Gold, which came in a rather sharp gatefold jacket, OB strip, fold-out poster, and pressed on 5 different colors of vinyl. Then in 2023, it was released as Live Detroit 1974, but as a 4-picture disc set, with each disc being devoted to each member, but the same audio contents across the board. Now, I have just the Peter picture disc, and that's because I convinced Brian over at Brian's Kiss Vinyl to break up a set because I really wanted the show, and I ended up storing the LP in a basic black jacket and used the backing sheet in the front, kind of like an old school bootleg. Definitely a show that deserves a colored vinyl repress. The next show we're going to focus on is the one from Lafayette's Music Room in Memphis, Tennessee on April 18th, 1974. This venue was a small club that many up-and-coming bands at the time would make a point at playing at, and for this occasion, KISS was opening for Kathy McDonald. The setlist for the show still focuses on the core songs performed from the previous 2 shows discussed, except the encore, interestingly enough, was an abbreviated version of Acrobat, which leaves out the first half, which is essentially Love Theme from KISS, and it was only the jam-based second half. Lafayette's Music Room had a radio partner by the name of WMC FM 100, who were responsible for broadcasting the show, and the resulting recording that circulates is reasonable at best, but does have its flaws, such as tape flutters and dropouts. Hell, one could assume that maybe what circulates is a couple generations removed from what could potentially be a master that's superior in quality. Now, a small portion of the show sort of bleeds its way into official territory, because Acrobat that from this show was synced to silent 8mm footage of what was mislabeled as the Long Beach Auditorium show from February 17th, but is actually from the Michigan Palace show from April 13th, and that was included on the Kissology Volume 1 DVD. Now let's talk about vinyl pressings of this show. Similar to the Detroit show, Trademark of Quality did 3 separate releases in 2011 called Much Too Young, Rockin' in Memphis, and Young Diamonds, each limited to 100 copies on colored vinyl. There's also a random release put out by the same label called Let It Be, with a 2014 photo of Paul on the cover. Then in 2013, we got Livin' the Dream, which was pressed on colored vinyl, and that's what I have in my collection. And in 2015, there was a picture disc pressing done as well. Now, this is one of the very few KISS radio broadcasts that have seeped into the gray market. I usually call these legal bootlegs because there are broadcast recordings that seep through copyright loopholes and become licensable for labels to put out. And 9 times out of 10, if a record store carries these types of releases, chances are high you will find this show in the KISS section. There are a couple of different pressings out there, most of which are simply labeled Lafayette's Music Room Memphis 4/1874. Some have cool covers with era-appropriate photos, or you'll have ones that are erroneously labeled to be recorded from 1984 and have a 2012 photo of the band on the cover. Goes to prove that bootlegs can truly be a hodgepodge. The last show we're going to focus on is the one from the Long Beach Auditorium in Long Beach, California on May 31st, 1974. The Long Beach Entertainment Center was a place KISS frequented often heavily during the early days. One of those cases where they started out playing at the auditorium, which was known as the Pacific Ballroom, ultimately working up to headline status at the big kahuna that was the Long Beach Arena. Now, for this show, they were bottom of the bill with Manfred Mann's Earth Band and Savoy Brown headlining. The set list is basically the Detroit show minus Cold Gin, and the spots where Strutter and Nothing to Lose are swapped. So instead of the classic 1-2 punch of Deuce and Strutter, it's actually Deuce and Nothing to Lose, which is an interesting divergence. This show was broadcasted by KNAC FM, and depending on the source you're listening to, it can either sound close to excellent, as if it was a pre-FM reel, or it can sound reasonable, as if it was recorded off-air onto a cassette. Now let's talk about vinyl pressings of this show. In the world of KISS bootlegs, this show is a classic because it was the source of one of the very first KISS bootlegs that came out as far back as 1976, called Fried Alive. There's several editions out there on different colored vinyl and different colored inserts, and at the same time, there was also a release called First Kiss in Long Beach. It's worth mentioning that these releases didn't include Baby Let Me Go from the show, and in its place was a recording of Rock and Roll All Night from San Diego 1976. Fast forward to 2012, there was the KISS Carton, and these were reissues of classic 70s era bootlegs, and Fried Alive got a new pressing with an updated colorized version of the original artwork. There was also a picture disc version done as well, and these two releases reinstated Baby Let Me Go, but still included Rock and Roll All Night. Fried Alive also got reissued once with a fresh cover, and there's a variant under the title Light Years Ahead, which uses the graphics from the Cream magazine comic that served as the basis of the Dress to Kill cover. Recently, there was a release put out called Silver Bandits. That is part of the 1974 series that I mentioned previously in regards to the Cleveland broadcast. It's the full show, but doesn't include Rock and Roll All Night, but does include a giant fold-out poster, printed inner sleeve, and colored wax, and that is what's in my collection. So there you guys go. That is the first episode of a new series called A Guide to KISS Bootlegs. If there are any bootlegs from specific eras, tours, lineups, or a particular show you want me to focus on in future episodes, please drop a comment down below. I'd love to know. And if you enjoyed this video, please go ahead, give it a like, and subscribe to the channel. See you guys in the next video, and most importantly, keep the records spinning.